Recording. Alrighty. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our event today focused on racial and climate justice. I want to thank you for being here for our conversation today. I'm Jennifer Borland. I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities at Oklahoma State. And I have a few items I want to mention, and then I'll introduce our three speakers. And then we will move on to some time for discussion and Q&A towards the end of our time. But I do want to remind all of you that if you are in Stillwater tomorrow or Wednesday, Dr. Reyes-Santos will be speaking about fostering collaboration in the public humanities at 3:30 in the Helmerich browsing room at the OSU Library. A reception with refreshments will precede her talk starting at 3 o'clock, so we hope to see you there. And if you are interested in getting more information about the Center for the Humanities, our events, or other opportunities, you can check our website at humanities.okstate.edu or email us at humanities@okstate.edu. Alrighty, and now I'm going to jump into our introductions. So Dr. Alaí Reyes-Santos is director of the Mellon-funded Pacific Northwest Just Futures Institute for Racial and Climate Justice and director of community engagement for the Climate Solutions Center at the University of Oregon. She teaches as a professor of practice at the University of Oregon School of Law and is an independent scholar and consultant. She is founder of ACC, a BIPOC-led consulting firm that facilitates organizational transformations and community engagement. She holds a BA in Humanities from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and received her MA and PhD at the University of California, San Diego. Her wide-ranging scholarship and teaching involve community-engaged and digital humanities approaches and a focus on Dominican-Puerto Rican relations, Afro-Latinidad, and environmentalism. Dr. Eunice Blavascunas is an associate professor of anthropology and environmental studies and the chair of anthropology at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. She completed her PhD in cultural anthropology at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and has taught at the University of Washington's Program on the Environment and held a Fulbright Fellowship in addition to fellowships at the Rachel Carson Center for the Environment and Society in Munich and the Leibniz Institute GWZO in Leipzig. For more than 20 years, she has been researching and writing about conservation politics in nature preserves in Eastern Europe and has experiences working with a number of US-based land management agencies. Her collaborative projects include a podcast, an ARC GIS Storymap focused on land, air, and justice, created with community partners and students. Dr. Marsha Weisiger is an associate professor of history and environmental studies and the Julie and Rocky Dixon Chair of US Western History and the co-director of the Center for Environmental Futures at the University of Oregon. Her work examines conservation policy and environmental and social justice in an effort to create usable histories that foster more sustainable places. Her most recent book, Dreaming of Sheep in Navajo Country, examines the history of pastoralism in the Navajo Reservation and explores the failure of a New Deal soil conservation program. Her current research is focused on Western rivers, exploring narratives of change and resilience. She grew up in central Oklahoma and has an MA from the University of Oklahoma and received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has lived in Arizona and New Mexico, as well as in Oregon. And Dr. Weisiger's work for the Institute is focused on oral histories, focusing around histories of Oregon's public lands. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our speakers. But thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for hosting us. I am so thrilled to be here in Oklahoma. Everyone has been lovely the past few days. Wonderful, sweet people, and just inspiring work. I'm just thrilled to be here with Eunice and Marsha, my beloved colleagues, and now friends through the past 3 years. We've gone through a lot together in creating these projects. And so without further ado, what I'll do is I'm going to give you a preview of a project that I co-led with Dr. Anna Marie Lara, who's a professor of anthropology and women and gender studies at U of Oregon, as well as a huge team of people from the University of Oregon Libraries, who I'll name in a moment, and a good number of students and community partners who did this project with us. So what I'll do is I'll share with you features of the Digital Humanities Project and then talk a little bit about the collaborative piece that happened in each one of those features. I'm going to talk for 7 minutes because we want to have Q&A. So that's what we're doing. So I'm going to share my screen here. And first of all, I want to say that this project, the Healers Project, which you can find at healers.uoregon.edu, is a 10-year collaboration. It has counted with at least 30 people to be able to be possible. And we wanted to highlight specifically women, non-binary, queer and trans-identified, people who do traditional medicinal work and are traditional ecological keepers in their communities. We began in the Caribbean islands because both Dr. Lara and I are Caribbeanists, and then began to work in the Pacific Northwest as well with Caribbean communities there, as well as other Black and Indigenous communities in the region. Here in this page, I like to feature this page because this piece shows one of our collaborations with one of our PhD students, Rachel Lee, who amazingly created this story map to illustrate Caribbean geographies and Pacific Northwest geographies, because usually we don't think of those two regions as having much to do with each other. But in the interviews we did, especially with Caribbean people in diaspora in the Pacific Northwest, we realized there's all these amazing interconnections between both regions, and also in the ways that Afro-Indigenous communities talk about healing, caring for land, bodies, minds, and spirit. And so this is her work. I give her complete credit, Rachel Lee, for doing this beautiful visual representation that you can access as a printable PDF, as a web page, or on the landing page as well. This was also important because in the Caribbean, most people do not know where the Pacific Northwest is. And in the Pacific Northwest, people do not know where the Caribbean is. So we hope it's become a really useful tool for teaching as well. Then I'll pass now to the methodology section. And in the methodology, what we did is that we co-created our methodology with all of the people we interviewed. And so if you go to the website, you'll see that we have audio clips with Afro-Indigenous healers and traditional ecological keepers in Spanish and in English, with translations, with transcriptions. And the work happened as we walked down streets with people, recording as we walked, sometimes walking through a hot tropical noon forest and like talking about plants as we went with someone. And so that's a lot of how the methodology happened, is however people wanted to talk with us, that's how we talked with them. And how we curated the interviews, depending on however people wanted to share the interviews with us. So for example, when you listen to the interviews, you may listen in the background TV. And it's because maybe a whole family was watching TV while we were actually talking about healing with someone. And there were cousins and there were grandchildren. And something that happened in the interviews too is that people share with us the values they wanted to kind of embed in the project. And we made sure that we articulated those here in this page. And in our collaboration with the UO Libraries Digital Humanities team, Franny Gady, Kate Thornhill, Elizabeth Peterson, Isel Malinao, Julia Simic, they helped us think of ways to make this visually attractive and highlight it in different kinds of ways. But the methodology in this regard was definitely part of a collaboration with our interviewees and then with the Digital Humanities team, thinking about the ethics of sharing the stories in this multimedia format. Now, if you go to the tab called Healers, you will find a narrative at the beginning talking a bit about the kinds of questions we were asking. And then also you find links to be able to connect to the interviews themselves. And so you'll be able to click on the link, for example, for Don Luis Vidal and Adela, who gave us an interview as people were coming to them asking for herbal remedies literally screaming from the street and coming and talking with us. And so you'll be able to go there and find the interviews in this format, which has been beautifully done by our colleague Kay Thornhill and Rachel Solee, and the metadata and transcripts by a whole team of people, including students that were trained in DH for the first time to do this work. The other feature of the project is the tab called Gathering Grounds. This is not something we had planned to cover or do with this project, but as we're walking with people and they're like, here, come with me, I'll talk to you about the plants that I use for healing, or the food that we think is healthy and we want to keep here, and the lands that I've cared for generations, I began to take photos of plants. And they said, you should have a section about the plants with their traditional names, not the scientific Latin names. We want to have the traditional names because we're losing these words, we're losing this knowledge as people migrate and leave and are all over the place. So we want to keep that knowledge alive. And so that's why you find here this collection that Aisel Malinau and Rachel Solee works really hard to put together as well. And you can find the collection of the photos as well as the audio clips in the platform called Aviary. So Aviary is a digital collection platform where you don't have the website, but you have the interviews and the photos with the data about what is it that's happening in each one of those places. But again, this happened because our collaborators, the interviewees, wanted to share these spaces with us. The library team also did the beautiful job of removing GPS location from these plant photos. Whenever I have forgotten to turn that off from my camera, they did that because we had, some interest from pharmaceutical companies wanting to patent and commodify some of these plants. And lastly, we developed this section called Conversao, where 12 different authors and interlocutors share photo essays, story maps. This one is a story map about the impact of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And this collection called the Ogun Collection, which is a series of pieces put together with Dr. Ana Lara and a number of students in the Dominican Republic and in the US about traditional practices in the Dominican Republic. So these are just fun pieces that we developed for people who want to teach in creative ways. And lastly, resources. In resources, what we wanted to do with these last two sections, Conversao resources, was highlight the collaborative components of the work and have as many voices as possible speaking with us in a non-rehearsed or scripted way, so people can make their own sense of relationship between different parts of the website. And so there's an ebook in Spanish that we wrote and shared with community members. There's a bibliography on Sotero, on the Sotero platform for people interested in Afro-Indigenous healing and TEK. There's actually also all of our presentations that have been recorded, our collective publications with the library's team and also with interviewees as well. Miriam Rigby, a librarian, put together a K-12 teaching guide. People want to teach the website in elementary schools, high schools. There's all these really cool other resources to teach. And so have fun if you want to and visit our site. And as you see, all of it is possible because of all those 30 people that came together to do the work. And I'm happy to answer more questions about it as well. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll pass the mic to Eunice.
Okay, hello everyone. Oops, now I need to share my screen. And okay, everyone can see my screen. So hello. This is a project that was a course offered for undergraduate students at Whitman College, a course called Land Water Justice. On the posters, I think it said Land Air Justice, but that's okay. Air and water, not so far apart. And I was really trying to prepare a course, a field course, a traveling field course that thought about racial justice in relation to land justice. And what does that mean in the context of settler colonialism? So this course ran for 2 years, and I'm trying to convince the administration to continue funding it for future iterations. But this is our question. How can we productively engage with the past to help us imagine more socially just and ecologically positive futures. We really tried to think about this in the inland Northwest. So this is east of where Alaí and Marsha are, and in places that really connected and stories that really connected. So I had to work with a lot of different community partners to bring some really important stories together. And these are stories of laborers as well as tribal counts, where students can start in the classroom thinking about manifest destiny and decolonization. And then we move out to learning with the land, on the land, with community partners who are actually trying to confront this legacy. And so students gain skills in digital storytelling, oral history, interviews, and this is the product of one of the years. The first year we did a series of podcasts, which are also really lovely, and I'm happy to share this with you. Let me just point out a few of the places we went and the kinds of stories that we're telling. So this is in the Yakima Valley here. And we worked together with another collaborator who was at the time at University of Oregon, Yesenia Hunter, to think about how poetry and storytelling allow us to create a sense of place. What role does art play in placemaking? And when we're thinking about placemaking here, we're thinking about laborers who often told stories about how they felt like they couldn't fully develop a relationship with land because they felt so exploited on that land. And some of the stories that we were able to tell that people told us kind of worked with and against that. So I'm going to play a 16-minute clip here of Aidan Hunter, who's discussing his relationship with the Cowiche Canyon.
The sage brush and its winter, the orchards, and the
Oh, it's not happening so smoothly, so I might pass over the video, but I encourage you to go look at it. He's telling a story about his relationship to Cowiche Canyon in specific terms related to birds and plants that are there, with a lovely guitar accompanist by one of the students there. Another place we went connected is a little bit south and east of there. We went to Wallowa County. This is one of the folks that Alaí has been working with also, Gwendolyn Trice, who is the executive director, organizer, founder, healer of this place that's called Maxville, which was formerly a segregated logging camp. And she has recently purchased 230 acres of land where she can tell the story about her father and many other Black men who came to this area in the 1920s, 1930s, and labored for the Bowman Hicks Lumber Company. So having reacquired this land only recently and, erected some historical buildings there. She's really thinking about cultural inclusivity and how you can use this story of a segregated past to develop all kinds of new relationships of stewardship on this land. So we got to celebrate the 100th year anniversary of this site with her. I mean, 100 years since the site was founded. From there, we went again a little bit north and over to the east because we want our stories to kind of intersect. And while we were in Wallowa County, where Gwen Trice is, we also heard about the story of the expulsion of the Nez Perce from the Wallowa Valley, and that the way the Nez Perce moved out of that valley through canyons to get to the Hell's Canyon area in Idaho and make their escape to the Canadian border before they were caught by General Howard. And as we learned about that story, we also see there are all these other intersecting stories of American Western history. This one has to do with a group of Chinese miners that were massacred as they were logging for gold. Local nonprofits, community groups erected this monument here. And it has a a rather strange name that gets used in a kind of gory touristic way. The site is called Chinese Massacre Cove, which is problematic in many ways, and my students were grappling with that. But visiting this site and seeing this site with Chinese students, with Nez Perce members, we were able to also create our own rituals in relationship to this place. So if I were to play the video here, which I'm not going to do because I don't want it to be glitchy, you would hear both in Cantonese and in Nimiputimpt, which is the language of the Nez Perce, an account of this massacre and the names of the Chinese that were massacred in this site. Here are the names of those victims. One of the students from the course, who was an international student from China, was so moved that he wrote a very lovely poem that I want to share with you. Recall History from the Snake River by Lu Wei. Seeking opportunities to live, arrived at the Snake River, lost their lives on the beach across the Pacific Ocean, at a peaceful, harmonious day when all the wars and chaos disappeared. 30 innocent souls will return to their homeland. So anyway, the course overall was 3 weeks long. It was a traveling field course. We worked with camping equipment, including a horse trailer that the university lent us. And it was a really moving, inspiring 3 weeks with these students, both in 2022 and 2023. And these relationships have continued to grow. I have seen your theses now on these different projects that the community partners are involved with. And that cuts across environmental history, anthropology, and who knows what else will come out of it. But yeah, many collaborations now between University of Oregon and our community partners, and with Whitman College and the community partners. And we hope, again, these will last for years to come. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eunice. That's fabulous work you've done. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so the Center for Environmental Futures, when we got started, one of the things that we wanted to do as part of our work is some kind of field research project. And I'm a historian with oral history experience, and we decided to do an oral history project on the public lands. And the co-director of the Center for Environmental Futures, Stephanie Lemenager, she was integral to all of this work, but she couldn't be here today because of a family health issue. But our inspiration as we began this project to speak of common places, which we hope we plan to develop a book out of this, but also we originally started off thinking we would create a online atlas that would have little film clips of everybody we interview. We're not sure we're going to go forward with that or not. We're still trying to figure out how effective that is as outreach project. But at any rate, our inspiration when we started was the occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 2016, and also the creation and then decommissioning of the Bears Ears National Monument between 2016 and 18. It's been re-established. We don't really know what the future of that monument will be, but these kind of inspired us to think about public lands and what rural people really think about public lands. So we did field work that consisted of interviews with a video team. Also, we complemented that with archival research. And we feel strongly that humanities work should be place-based, meaning it should be rooted in the specific social milieu and ecosystems of the people. And we asked a few questions out of this. Do Oregonians want public lands? The answer is yes. How does the sentiment about public lands break down among different stakeholder groups? What cultural and community factors make the public lands more or less attractive? What challenges are there for us? Because most of these lands are essentially co-managed between the people who are working the land, like ranchers, and federal and state land managers. And so we wanted to understand kind of what's going on with it. And I guess the short answer to this is that every single person that we interviewed favors the public lands and they favored federal management of those lands, which is not to say they don't have complaints. And much of those complaints have to do with sort of a lack of recognition of the generations of experience that many people that we interviewed have in these specific places, and the high turnover in federal management agencies and how people come and go and they don't really create the kinds of connections that are really necessary to manage the public lands well. So we looked at, say here, we looked at 4 different areas of the state, trying to get a kind of a broad swath of places in which there were public lands controversies, and yet are really invested in collaborative work. And in fact, one of the things about when the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was taken over, I was kind of stunned by that because Hardin County in particular is the poster child for collaborative work between federal land managers and federal and land users like ranchers. So I was stunned that this was happening in Harnett County. But at any rate, so we started in Harnett County. We went up to the Wallowas where Eunice was talking about. We also went to Clatsop County, which has a famous case in which that turned Oregon's beaches into public beaches, all of them. And then the area we have yet to actually do our interviews in so far is Jackson County. We plan to start interviewing in that area this year. So we were looking at how attachment to specific places through recreational use, hunting, fishing, logging, ranching, and agricultural work have shaped political and cultural affiliations, what the future of the public lands might be, and how the history of public lands intersects with environmental justice issues, particularly regarding indigenous land sovereignty and socioeconomic class. We've interviewed 54 Oregonians so far, and we've involved in our work 8 other UO faculty, 2 research assistants, 2 visiting scholars, a postdoc, and another person from the University of, Michigan Technical University, and 8 other graduate students. Let's see here. Okay, so we interviewed a variety of people. We interviewed ranchers, loggers, and that sort of thing. Jack Southworth sort of stands for that. His great-grandfather homesteaded in Oregon in 1885. He's a founder of the High Desert Partnership, which is a really great collaborative organization. And he discussed how he came to restore lands that his grandfather and grandfather had allowed to become overgrazed, and using what's known as the savory method of grazing, which involves really heavy grazing use and then moving livestock off the land and letting it to recover, that has really helped his land become much healthier. Have been interviewing members of tribal communities. This is Diane Tiemann, who is the tribal archaeologist and cultural heritage director for the Burns Paiute tribe. And she spoke about the expertise that tribal members have gained regarding their land through intergenerational relationships with the land itself, and how important that has been and how hurtful it was for the Malheur wildlife takeover, which included Paiute lands, and they desecrated those lands. But also the close community partnerships that they have also developed in Harnett County. We talked with Autumn Larkins and other public lands managers. Autumn was then the assistant director, assistant district wildlife biologist for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in Harney County. And we've talked with public lands managers everywhere we've gone. And then finally, this is Diane Daggett, another rancher. She is a fourth generation rancher in Wallowa County. Her great-great-grandfather arrived with a second wagon train in Wallowa County 2 years after Chief Joseph and his band of Nez Perce were forcibly removed from the Wallowa Valley after years and years of resistance. In the 1990s, Ms. Daggett became the planning director for Wallowa County and later the founding director of Wallowa Resources, which fosters local collaborations among all peoples, including tribal members in the area, like at the Umatilla Reservation. When the federal government proposed listing the Snake River Chinook salmon as a threatened species, her community of ranchers was in an uproar, and some people suggested that they follow the lead of radicals in Nevada who were opposing all federal oversight of public lands, and instead they founded the Wallowa Resources collaboration. And if this works, I'm going to show you a little clip where she explains what the value is of collaboration in her community.
So in the early gathering, we were pretty intentional about trying to bring together bridgers and opinion leaders. The opinion leaders who would go out and say, you know, I think this might be a good thing for us to take a look at. And people would respect that, right? And give a little nod. And the bridgers would get people together. We intended to be inclusive. And so we were pulling together Forest Service people with local government people, with those who were aligned with the conservation movement, with mill owners, with loggers. You know, we were trying to pull together everyone who, some people really didn't like each other. They had been at war with each other. And so it was a little dicey. We first had a conversation about value because it's really easy for us to talk from a basis of interest, right? What I'm interested in or who gives me that paycheck, right? But we can find common ground when we talk about values, and we talk from the basis of shared core values. And so we started out with bringing everyone together and just asking some open-ended questions. So what do you love about this place? What do you want to keep here? What's important to you that we keep, we not lose? And when diverse interests heard common themes, we want the land to be healthy. We want a strong economy. We want safety for our children. We want to keep our rural character and values. So it was after that, after establishing that core values that we share. And that's when the road got rough. That's what we went back to every time. Remember, we all want the same things ultimately. So the upside is it's fun. It's nice to build relationship. When there was something sticky, we could take a walk in the woods, you know, and just talk about it, right? The problem with collaboration is that it's tied to those relationships. And so every time someone moves to a different location, gets a different job, dies, you got to rebuild a relationship again, and it takes time.
Okay.
So
basically I want to encourage university educators to get outside and do field work. This work, we are hoping to at least find pathways to bridging the rural-urban divide. We've wanted, one of the things that's been really important in our project is just listening. We go in, we don't challenge people, we just listen to what they have to say. And they've been kind of amazed at the fact that people coming from a very liberal university have come and just listened to them and you know, been concerned about their own community health and the health of their land. And then we hope to share this expertise with everyone to help make our futures much better. So thank you. That's it for me.
Do you think you can stop sharing as well? Marsha, are you able to stop sharing? Perfect. Thank you so much. You're also muted.
Yeah. I wanted to say one last thing, and that because of the climate idea behind this panel is that we didn't speak directly about climate issues with people, but they would come to us afterwards. And there was one interesting exchange that happened during our first interviews between a very conservative rancher and Stephanie Lemonager. And he came up and said, after talking with us, and he was really moved by the fact that we really listened hard to him. And he said, well, he could see climate change. He can see it on the land. He knows it's happening. It's just politically impossible to talk about. And so we're wanting to give people the kind of permission to use whatever language they need to talk about with what they're seeing on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Your projects are inspiring and so rich. I think we all will enthusiastically go back and look at your websites and learn more. I, at this point, would love to welcome our attendees to throw questions in the Q&A. And I'm not sure if hand raising will allow us to ask a question, because we're in, Jessica, we're in the webinar format. So I don't think that, maybe you can still put your question into the Q&A or the chat.
They can definitely put questions in the Q&A and we can just,
yeah.
Right.
But maybe while we're waiting to get some questions from our audience, do you have any questions for each other? Or things that you wanted to highlight about your projects? Well, we do now have a question that we can put out there. Okay. Okay. We've got some questions. I'm just going to jump in on them. But certainly if you do also want to touch base with each other on anything, jump in and do that. Our first question is, how can these studies of environment and race intersect with gender studies?
I can get us going with that one just because it's so core to our project. You know, for us, the gender studies lens was key from the beginning, because something that we have noticed is one, and it's something that we were talking about last night over dinner, talking about the age work in Native communities, is that there tends to be an absence of women-identified people, of queer, trans, non-binary people in the kind of like public oral history work that happens, right? And also in digital formats, in video formats, there's people feel intimidated in sharing in those formats. And so for us, that was key as we began to talk with people about who was going to be featured, but also the people who had talked to us about wanting to be featured and that they wanted to see this project happen. Now, something that was key for us is, and that we learned, is that also shaped the methodology, is that those were also the most vulnerable people in the communities we talked to. And so, for example, they would tell us, at the beginning, we had this idea of video and a film, and people didn't like the idea of being video recorded. They would talk with us forever on audio. And they said, take my audio, 6 hours, we'll keep talking all day. And so I think that the gender studies lens allowed us to also modify our methodology to account for gender and sexual vulnerabilities in the communities that we were working with, and how, as these were the most vulnerable people in the community, also the fact that they were traditional healers and that they could be in some communities considered to be bad witches who could hurt the community. They could be criminalized also as well by police or profiled, surveilled, and also stigmatized. We interviewed one healer who said, please don't use my name. This is a small community. If you use my name or my photo or anything that can identify me, I will not be allowed to go into church. And that's the only place where community gathers here. Everybody will come for healing into my house. I'm the healer, I'm the curandera. But if I make this public, I will be stigmatized. And so those were some of the things that were clear to us, where the environmental work, that kind of stewardship work that people are doing of land, of medicinal knowledge, the Afro-Indigenous realities that people are facing and gender intersected to impact even how we were able to tell the story in the first place.
We have lots of questions, so I'm going to keep just working through those. Let's see, the next one. What was the name of the second project that was spoken about? And I'm going to pop some links in as our speakers are answering the questions.
The second project was a field course called Land, Water, Justice, and I just put a link to our story map there if you want to explore that course. And so again, that was through Whitman College, Land, Water, Justice.
All right, thank you. Our next question is, I'm loving all of this. Thank you. I know we have a lot of students in attendance. Could you speak to any connections you see in the intergenerational trauma experience in Oklahoma's history for both the people and land here?
Yeah, I think that is a big part of the project that we're working on here with the Center for Environmental Futures and our public lands. You know, I know a lot about Oklahoma history. I studied that when I was a master's student there. And there are some really strong similarities and some big differences too. Most of the people, I should say, Native people in Oregon have been moved away from their indigenous homelands to a different location. There are some who are living on a portion of their homelands as they do in Oklahoma. But so that's part of what we want to get at in our project is how do they feel about lands that are being called public lands that are for them their homelands, and what is it like to have to ask permission from the federal government to be able to do things that, first of all, are treaty rights, and second of all, are things that are sacred to them oftentimes, and they don't want to have to necessarily reveal sacred spaces to the federal government. So I think there are probably some overlap there with Oklahoma people, although I realize, many people who make their home in Oklahoma have had a series of traumas that have happened with relocation and then developing deep personal ties to an area and then being restricted because it's not public land, it's private lands. So it's really kind of very different, and yet I can understand how those same connections are there that we're finding in our own research. And I would encourage educators to work with community elders in particular to explore those histories, because there are multiple layers of loss and forgetting over time that I think need to be preserved for people in the future. And it might require, we were trained in decolonial methods of oral history. It might require some special protocols. And then Alaí, who has developed protocols for us, I want to turn it over to her, but developing protocols that protect Indigenous knowledge is super important in doing all of this. So I'll let Alaí speak to that.
Thank you, Marsha. Yeah, I think something that has been key in all of this work and that was key to all the work with JFI was that we would always co-create the methodology, the way we talk with people, how we tell the stories in a way that feels safe for the communities we were talking with, right? And with the communities we were talking with. And in being in this feedback loop of like, what do you think? Can I use this clip? Because maybe someone shares something with me in trust or with Eunice and there's her students camping in a beautiful campground. But then that was in that moment. It wasn't to share with the whole world, right? It had to do with that trust built with us in that particular moment. And so those are very quickly some things to consider as we think of the ways in which we do this work, especially being careful with intergenerational trauma. Something that I want to highlight that came to mind here, one of the intergenerational traumas that the communities we work with in the Healers Project is how people who are both Black and Indigenous tend to not find home either in Indigenous or Black community. It's like this constant questioning of where do you belong and where do you have rights? Do you have rights to land? Do you have rights to claiming Blackness or indigeneity? And that's something that we see in Oregon as the conversations we keep having with people like Amber Starks, for example, and that we also see throughout the US as well. We see it throughout the Caribbean, throughout Latin America. It's a real challenge. And I know that in Oklahoma, these conversations are also happening with Black Indian community members. How do you belong when you have blood quantum politics, for example, as a way to identify or be able to claim tribal belonging and citizenship? And so that piece is an intergenerational trauma that actually bridges across many places throughout the continent as well. And that requires that kind of care that Marsha was talking about.
I'm going to jump into here. I mean, this came up a lot in our course. So a lot of our community partners were 50 and above. The students were all 18, 20. I had moments in my course where I didn't expect my students to also be breaking down and being traumatized. I called in Alaí in year 2 to have specific trainings around that. Like, how do we actually meaningfully respond to the people that we're listening to? But also take time to care for ourselves as we're experiencing things and support one another, because it was kind of these waves of, whoa, we're dealing with a lot of trauma. I mean, the topics we took on were about massacres and Ku Klux Klan showing up at the segregated logging camp and expulsion from land. And also, the complications of being a farm worker on tribal land too. How do you broach these topics? How do you think about them? So, I mean, doing community-based learning with students that are talking with elders is so critical. And to set that up in a way that challenges students, perhaps even challenges community partners sometimes, but then also has very thoughtful containers for how to meaningfully respond and animate the next phase of history as well. Knowing that what we're doing is part of that history and part of healing on the land.
I have another question that I was curious if you could talk a little bit about kind of just the timeframe logistics of some of these projects. It seems like many of them cover multiple years. You have all these different collaborators, and obviously you've produced some things that are kind of the result of the project. Do you see these projects as having kind of endpoints or moving into new phases, or I don't know, can you just share some of your wisdom about working on these kind of projects and how those collaborations kind of evolve over time?
I'll start because ours is the oldest project, I guess, that we started in around 2016 or 17 was when we began our interviews. I'm not exactly sure which. I know that it takes time, first of all, to cultivate a community of people who are willing to be interviewed. And in each case, we started with a core group of people that we knew about. In the case of Harney County, one of the people who came out as a postdoc Nancy Langston from Michigan Tech. She had written a book about Hardin County and had people in that she had interviewed. And so we started with kind of her list of interviewees, and then each time we contacted someone, we asked them who they would suggest that we talk to, and we did this in each of the places we've been to. We had to get research permits with the tribes to be able to talk with people there. That takes time. And so we've only interviewed among tribal members in Oregon, we've only interviewed people who are with the Burns Paiute tribe so far, because that's who we've had permits with. We've reached out to other communities, and COVID happened in the middle of our project. And so we didn't want to do anything that would endanger anyone, particularly tribal people often have various underlying conditions among elderly people that we were talking to. So we are still in the process of obtaining tribal permits to do that research. Even though it's oral history, and oral history isn't required anymore by the federal government to get go through their sort of review process, but we are still doing this anyway because we think the ethics of it is all very important. And we've also, I have to say, we give everyone the ability to not only edit their transcript, but before we can use anything in publication or anything on our website, or using Diane Dackett's little clip that I showed you, we reach out to them and ask for their permission to use the specific words so that they are able to represent themselves the way they want to be represented. And so all of this takes a great deal of time. And because in our case, because we're using students and traveling places that are not close by in any instance, we're doing our work like during breaks, during the summer, that sort of thing, and that prolongs the time scale that it takes to do this work. But once we complete our interviews in Jackson County and a few others with tribal members throughout the region that we're looking at, we'll call it a day, and there will be an end to our project once we go into print. So, but that's not for, it's probably a couple of years down the road before we're done.
Relationships take a long time to build. So I started building mine, I think the year before we went out into the field. And it just takes networking, calling people up. I mean, there were lots of sort of failed relationships, which is fine to admit. Like, I thought, oh, that sounds like a great lead, but sometimes people just don't want to talk with you. They don't have time to talk with you. So just honoring that too, and trusting in the process. I mean, really treating people well, paying them well, buying them meals. I mean, all of those small things go into building relationships. Yeah, like letting people listen to the interviews that you did with them, asking for permission. So I know Whitman College has already, built those relationships out beyond just the land water justice course, which I think is fantastic. And I think that was the whole intention behind the Mellon Foundation's Just Futures grant in the first place. So I'm really excited about that. And boy, what can I say? Just realizing that if you're going to do, I think, audio video projects too, that there's this extractive element. I think we had Alaí and Anna at an event, and they were just very clear with the students, like, this part is not to be recorded. We don't want this in. And realizing like your project isn't going to end because if you didn't get that great moment that you can use on video. There's going to be more. There's going to be lots of material you can use. So just, again, trusting when people say no, and respecting people.
Oh, thank you both. That was amazing. You see, I think for us, we had So we had two different timelines. The first one was the first phase of the project, which was only Caribbean healers. And that was easier in a way. It had taken a long time because we both are actually traditional healers from the Caribbean, and the project emerged out of our elders saying, so you have these PhDs. Do something to disseminate and validate and visibilize this knowledge as people are like leaving the countryside and so on and so forth and migrating. And so somehow I feel like in a way it took like 15 years only because we had taken all that time to develop those relationships in a different context. And then it was about developing this other kind of relationship as scholars and as researchers, and then meeting other people. And sometimes there are people who we met within the process of the research, just walking down a street in a small town and talking with people and asking, who are the healers here? Want to have coffee with us? And so I feel like that time was key. And that's why I say 10 years is because it took a lot of time for those relationships and that kind of trust. And then to get a good sense of what people wanted to share. And then we completely underestimated what digital humanities requires. Because we thought, oh, we both built websites before. We can do this. And then we got a small fellowship from the Digital Humanities Project Center at University of Oregon, which really was a labor of love. Their FTE did not cover all the work they did with us, which is why I love them so much. And that took 2 years. Like we had the interviews, and now we had to do all this other metadata, choosing clips, how are we going to have them? Does the color scheme, is it culturally appropriate? If people see this back in rural areas, do they have good internet bandwidth for this particular platform? Does it look well? But this back and forth also not only about content, but also technology. And so that part of that first phase took 5 years. And then I would say maybe 7. And then this last phase, because the Mellon grant was 3 years, it was fast speed ahead. And that forced us to make particular kinds of hard choices. And I'm happy to talk about that tomorrow at the talk because time is up. But there's hard choices that we have to make when you have a grant and a limited amount of time. And those were some of the choices. We had to not include some things that we wish we could have included. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. That's a great way to wrap things up. So yes, I do want to remind those of you who are here that we will continue this conversation tomorrow when Dr. Reyes-Santos is going to present more broadly about sort of different ways to foster collaboration in the public humanities, but building on many of these projects for sure. Thank you so much, all three of you, for taking the time to share these projects. I think we all are extremely inspired and thinking about what this might mean for our work here. And so we're just very grateful for your time. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to our speakers or to us directly, and we can put you in touch in case you didn't get a chance to answer your question, have your question answered today. Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Eunice and Marsha and everyone. Thank you, Sarah and Jennifer.